Good evening for me. Good morning for you. Good afternoon, whenever it is you see that. Uh, let's get talking, man. So today, really, these first 2 weeks are kind of. I'm not gonna lie, they are kind of procedural stuff that we more or less just kind of gotta get through. The whole class, I promise, is not as sort of I don't want to say dull, but it's not a history class, but we do need to cover a part of history, the photographic part of history, where we sort of get our part and purpose of being here. So what I'm going to do is I've put this document up on Canvas. You can follow along if you like. There's just a little questionnaire type thing at the end. It's really no sweat. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of go about these things. I'm going to maybe read the text, maybe just kind of off the cuff. But yeah, you should be able to follow along nicely here with the document that's in Canvas. So essentially, we're going to start with the history of photography. Okay. So photography it itself, photo means light, and graph typically means a way to record, right? So a way to record light is what we're looking at when we look at the word photography. Okay. Now, so for this assignment, we're going to identify the major photographic discoveries and advancements throughout history. Okay. It has evolved going all the way back. I'm not even sure when we can really say, let's see, camera obscura became a thing. It looks like 1671 is when camera obscura became a thing. Now, what camera obscura was a way for artists to recreate accurately an image. Okay. Now, what they would do is they would have a black box here, and they would cut a hole in it. And what would happen is that the light would travel in straight lines, and it would go through this lens, this tiny hole, and it would be projected, but it would be projected upside down because physics dictates that light can travel in straight lines, and we can't break physics. That's how it appeared. Okay, so here we've got another example of this, right? We've got this castle on the hill, the black box of camera obscura, and the light would travel again in straight lines so that it would appear upside down. Now, an artist would hang their canvas, and they would trace the line, and they would trace it upside down, and then they would take it out of the black box, and then they would paint it in, kind of painting by numbers. So really kind of our earliest advancements, or our earliest example of photography was using light to create, right, in camera obscura. Okay. Now, I know we're saying this happened, 400 years ago, but in fact, our cameras still work this way today. They just have a series of things that cleverly flips them upside down so that when we look at them through the lens of our cameras or through our phones or whatever it is that we use as a camera, they're flipped the right way up. Okay? So, neat little thing to look out there. Okay? So, fast forward a good, 100 years or so, and we have a guy named Johann Schultz in what I can assume is Germany or thereabouts, Bavaria, one of those middle Western Europe regions. And he comes up, he notices, hey, German scientist right there, notices that there are certain chemicals that behave to light. Okay, they're photosensitive or light sensitive to light. And what happened is the OG here was silver. If you've ever been to your grandma's house or you have jewelry that you or maybe your mom or somebody hasn't worn for a while, you may notice that it gets these black spots on it. Okay, that black spot is the chemical reaction that light has to silver. Now, Johann Schultz mixed chalk, nitric acid, and silver to create something that was called silver nitrate. And this would become darker as it was exposed to light. Okay? So he didn't really see a viable future of this. It was just something that, the scientist, the natural mind of science was exploring. Okay? However, there was a Frenchman called Nicephore Niepce I think, I don't know, who in, about 50 years later created the first photograph. Now, what he did was coat a plate with silver nitrate and expose it via camera obscura out his window. And this, is it listed here? This out the window at Le Gras, I think I got it right. View from the window at Le Gras, excuse me, is widely regarded as the very first photograph. And there it's been colorized. There it is on the plate. And then here we have a crude negative scan. So it took like 4 hours or something. Let's see if we've got the list here. Well, I'm just going to search hours. 8 hours. Lasted about 8 hours, which is our traditional estimate, it appears. Okay, and then there we go. View from the window at Le Gras. That's the first image ever recorded as what we would later term as a photograph. Okay, parked it on his window, but again, not very practical, right? Practical for maybe landscapes, but not really for anything like people or things that are moving. Okay. Then we have this guy named Henry Fox Talbot. He was an Englishman, and he was sort of what was known as the gentleman scholar back in the day. Now, what he did is camera obscura had sort of been shrunk down over the years, and Fox Talbot created these little photographs, and any of these larger ones. What he did is he got silver nitrate and then applied it to a more compact version of the camera obscura, and he took these images. Now, this was the negative. So what would happen is when you took the image, the light parts would become dark because they were exposed to light, and light reacted with the chemical to make it dark. Now, what they would do is that they would put two pieces of the same material together, and then they would expose the one. And then this was what was known as a negative print. Because as I expose this part here where it's light, right, that light becomes dark. And vice versa. The dark here is blocking the light here, so this appears white, what its original color was. And that's what we call photograph duplication. Okay, this was known as the calotype. Essentially, what they did is essentially how I described, right? They would take one picture, and then they would marry the two together, expose them to light again, and then you'd have a proper exposure. Lesser time, 10, 30-minute exposures to do this, and then 10, 30-minute exposures to do that, and there we go. Very high-resolution images for their time. But then we fast forward to this French fellow who really gets widely credited with creating the first photographs. His name is Louis Daguerre. Now, Daguerre and the daguerreotype were printed on silver paper or silver pallets, almost like maybe a pie tin, and they were very good resolution. Okay. Now, interesting to note that Daguerre didn't really patent this. He said, this belongs to everyone. It's interesting technology that should be shared. Daguerre hated the English. And so if you were English, you had to pay a patent fee. Just kind of an interesting pettiness of history. Again, it's kind of a similar process. Then we have Frederick Archer, who printed to glass plates, which lessened the expense and made the photo duplication sort of infinite. It wasn't a one-time thing. You could keep going and going and going with these. Okay, and as you look, this is roughly the end of the middle of the 18th century or 19th century here, and the images look good. You can see that there's characteristics that we recognize right here, even today, of this swirly bokeh from the image. Right, still exists even today. Again, this is what we call wet plate photography. We had James Maxwell, who was first credited with creating a color photograph. Very expensive, very labor-intensive, not very practical. Richard Maddox created sort of the first gelatin plate photography, which was excuse me, this was dry plate photography as opposed to wet plate photography. The distinction being is that the chemicals here and that you would use here, you didn't have to immediately expose them to wet chemicals in order to get your picture done. So in essence, what that means is that you could take this picture, take it with you, go back home, and then expose it, as opposed to exposing it instantly, or rather on site. In 1889, this very important fellow named George Eastman rolls into town, and he creates a gelatin-based film with all these same chemicals that Richard Maddox had done, but he put it on a roll, like this, a film roll. Eastman, he went on to become the founder of Kodak, and the company was known as Eastman Kodak. You can see right there, Eastman Kodak. Now we just know it as Kodak. But George Eastman was the first person to create a roll film. He was also the first person to create a mass-produced consumer camera, which was known as the Brownie. Then we have Auguste and Louis Lumiere, who made color film affordable to the masses. This was in the early 1900s. It was still sort of a novelty, and you can see it wasn't super able to be widely available. You can see here on the last line it says was not available as a roll, which was really kind of the big important thing. Then we have Ernst Leitz, L-E-I, Leitz there, and his camera was known as the Leica. And this is where the photography as we know it really, we share common traits with. Okay, so Ernst Leitz took the 35 millimeter format, which was common amongst the cinema industry at the time, and took the film from this era, took the film from the cinema industry and put it in his own design of camera. And the cinema industry was using 35 millimeter as a standard, and so you could buy just yards of this film for fairly cheap and then put it in a camera. This is the reason that 35 millimeters is the standard for the cameras that we still shoot with today. It's all because of this guy. Leica is still in business. They make very bougie cameras that are very, very, very expensive, but people still buy them, and they're great. I've never owned one. They're just not practical for the everyday photographer. If you're a dentist or a doctor and you feel like photography is a hobby, great. Outside that, industry professionals using large format cameras will still use some very nice Leica stuff. Harold Edgerton invented the flash. This is an image of ink dropping in ink with a synchronous flash, a flash that was synced to the shutter of the camera. And this was really the game changer for what you could capture in an image. Then in 1935, Kodak, again, just groundbreaking for their whole career until essentially the digital camera shut them down. Despite the fact that they were the first people to invent the digital camera, came up with the color roll film. Then didn't really catch on, I would say, until about the maybe 10 years, 15 years later, when color film really became popular. Yeah, really cool, great advancement. Didn't take root initially. Again, people always think it's a gimmick, you know what I mean, and they don't really do anything with it. Now, this is kind of a cheap image here, but Edwin Land in 1948 created the instant film. And you may have seen these or played with these. Essentially how they work is that this chunk here is the photosensitive area, and then there is emulsion that is stored down here. And as soon as you take the picture, that's your exposure, right? That's the photosensitive particles have been exposed to light. And then this part where the emulsion lives gets squeezed out over this, and then it gets collected here at the end. Then that exposes the light-sensitive part. It seals it, makes it a permanent photo. Really cool process. It's still used today. I mean, if you can buy those little Fujifilm cameras. They still do the same thing. We're skipping a very important thing between 48 and 89. It's not like nothing happened between here, but the major advancements as far as film is concerned there. Right here, and I think it, gosh, 1974, maybe? I can't remember. The first digital camera was invented by Kodak, Eastman Kodak. Didn't really do anything with it, sat on the technology forever, didn't really go anywhere with it. 1989, Photoshop, the Adobe Corporation comes to town, and then now we're able to put birds with arms and birds with the head of a rabbit here, seamlessly. Okay, still use Photoshop every single day. The original images had to be scanned in, and then in 1991, Kodak. I say they kind of sat on the technology, and they did and they didn't. Right, what they were focused on was how to integrate digital or film cameras into the digital world, where they should have just capitalized on sensor technology and then put it into cameras. Anyway, so Kodak comes to town and they put this brick on the bottom of a pretty crappy film camera here, the Nikon N90, and they're able to record images digitally. Now, the first digital cameras, the first consumer grade digital cameras, really were terrible. They were very, very, very expensive, and they were very, very low, poor quality. But eventually they came around, and now they're cheap and small. So that's a 15-minute tour of the history of film and photography. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have questions, let me know. There's not really a test per se on this. The questions that I will have you respond to are directly related to our state test, which is the final test at the end of the semester. Everything that I'll write there will be effectively a test on, a question on the test. So you should know that much at least. If you've made it this far in the film, I'm just going to drop you with an Easter egg for extra credit points. My favorite hockey team is the Toronto Maple Leafs. If you feel like putting that into the answer box at the end here, I will give you bonus points. Thank you so much. We will see you later.